Going for two, kickers are extra, I give them the boot. Ooh, going for two, sit back, relax while I grab me a brew. Ooh, now I'm reclining while putting my time and I'm ready to go. My spine is aligning and much my lineups, my bank account grow. I am so rich, but knowledge is all that I'm leaving it with. Ooh, listen to this, multiple options, how far can I get? Ooh, DFS Dynasty redraft tonight, I'm not finishing last. I'm finishing past any and all, I am looking to last. What else? This spot is popping and I am so locked in and only opening the door when it is opportunity knocking. And all of these spots keep on talking and talking. So what are we talking? What kind of alignment? And running it deep, even players forgotten or came from the bottom or hitting that top end. And this spot is popping, yeah, this spot is popping. And woo! This is the armchair, yeah. Put up your arms, yeah. Sound the alarm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Woo!
What is going on, guys, and welcome to the Gardabaer 210 Personal League Podcast. I am your host, of course, Jeff Lambert, and you can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. We are here tonight to break down their league, and I will apologize in advance. This is an international league, and some of the names on here I will not be able to pronounce, like the league name. I don't even know if I said that right. We're just going to go with it and hope that I said it right. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and introduce the panel here. First up, we got Mr. Brian Ford. He is the co-host of the Dynasty Saturday Night Live 5 and the Dynasty Fever podcast, and you can follow him on Twitter at ffjunkie_. What's up, Brian?
Not a whole lot. Really glad to be here. The Dynasty Fever, which you mentioned, by the way, is the number 57 fantasy sports podcast in the country of Iceland, and it's largely because of the commish of this league. So, yeah, ready to talk about the Build-A-Bear League. Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking when I said it, too. I'm like, Gardabaer? I hope I said that right. Probably didn't, but we'll go with it. Next up, we have Chew Russell. He is a writer and ranker at GoingFor2. He's also the host of the Father Dynasty podcast, and you can follow him at Father Dynasty. What's up, Chew?
What's up to all my Icelanders? I tried to learn this just for you guys. So I believe Father Dynasty in Icelandic is Fafish Ashtarente, something like that. So shout out to you, and I apologize if I said a bad word there.
From now on, you're going to announce all the teams that we're going to do in these rankings because
right.
You said it way better than I could have. Last but not least, we have Mr. Josh Walker. He is the other half of the Dynasty Saturday Night 5 podcast right here on GoingFor2 Live. He's also a writer and ranker at GoingFor2, and you can follow him at Rotonaut. What's up, Josh?
Hey, guys. How's it going? Bear with me here. I'm in a new location, doing a move, had to relocate for the show, but I'm happy to be here, happy to discuss some teams.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, before we get to the league, I do have some bad news. The Personal League podcast for 2023 have sold out. We have sold literally every date plus some. We still got to squeeze in somehow 4 or 5 more before the season starts. However, if you order yours now for 2024, you can save 20%. Use the promo code EARLYBIRD24. Just visit goingfor2.com/PLP and use the promo code EARLYBIRD24 to save 20%. That makes it about $7 a person in a 12-man league. So just up your entry fee for next year. $7 per person with the promo code, and you can get that done. I will say they are already kind of selling out. We've already sold out the whole month of July. Kind of crazy that people are already buying that far in advance, but with the whole month of July is now sold out. So if you want to get your league done, go ahead and jump in and get that done as fast as possible, and we'll get your league done next year. All right, so the way the podcast goes, I know this league has been done before. This is the first year we've done this league live, but we are going to rank these teams. I gave these guys their rosters, all the rosters of the league, and they ranked their teams 1 through 12, with 1 being the team they most want to take over, and 12 being the team they would least like to take over. And from that, we created a consensus ranking, which we'll count down tonight. And then these guys each have been assigned 4 teams each. When we get to their teams in the rankings, we will break them down. Strengths, weaknesses, maybe some trade advice, anything to improve their team going forward. But let's go ahead and jump right into it here and get to team number 12.
Number 12.
Number 12 team was ranked as high as 11 and as low as 12, and it is Gunnar Gunnarsson. And Brian, this is your squad here. Give us your breakdown.
Commish, Stefan, you might want to check on this manager, see if they're alive. Have they checked into the league lately? Because their roster does not reflect the fact that they've been active in the league and trying to improve their team, which is why it was sort of universally ranked 12th among the 12. Got a lot of age and mediocrity, but you're not bad enough to really suck. But you're bad at the most important position, quarterback. So you're in a weird position here with this team. However, unlike a lot of the teams that are towards the bottom in the leagues that we do, you have pretty intact draft capital, and that's something I always like to see. Quick overview, quarterback, you're looking at Stafford and pray for me. Zappy, Wentz, Malik Willis, who, right now is the quarterback 2 in Tennessee. Who knows? Running back, Swift, Madison, Gibby, and then, wide receivers, DK, Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, Elijah Moore. And then it starts to, Marvin Jones and Devontae Parker and Robert Woods, etc. Tight end, it's not a tight end premium league, and but you do have 3 good ones here in Kittle, Dulcich, and McBride. So given the one quarterback you do have is older and has been hurt, and you're not going to be able to compete without solid quarterbacks in a super flex, you may be looking at a total reboot here with this team, because he may be dust before you're even competitive. So if you're going to do that, these are the guys I want you to trade right now. Stafford, Swift, Madison, maybe Gibson. He's on the rise. We're going to talk about that on Saturday, but there may even be more value to go up even further in season. But sell the positive buzz on Swift now. Sell Madison as a starting running back before people kind of realize he's a little more mediocre than we think. Your older wide receivers like Amari Cooper and Tyler Boyd or Robert Woods, just get anything you can, right? I'm not anything you can for Cooper, but if you can get something for Devontae Parker and Mims and people like that, you may want to think about trading DK as well. Because again, you're not going to be competitive for a little while. Who knows how much JSN overshadows him. And I think he's kind of a fake alpha, like a fake wide receiver 1. I think he's overvalued. So he might be a guy. And also Ridley. People are already convinced he's going to be a beast and he's shooting up the ranks. I'm not convinced of that. You might want to trade him too. Kittle, 30-year-old tight end. You don't really need that. Trade later. Kenyon Drake. I hate saying this, but who knows what's happening in Indianapolis with the running backs? You're not going to get anything for him now. It can only go up. Dulcich is interesting, right? Because he's having supposedly a bad camp, and they're just going to use him in passing situations and things like that. But the name value's there. So you're may have to wait for him to have a couple of good games and prove that he's getting some action. I would probably hold Elijah Moore, but if he has a couple spike weeks, boom, get what you can for him, right? In general, I would hold Christian Kirk, probably Elijah Moore, Jaden Reed, a promising rookie, maybe DK, Dulcich, and McBride. But so what are you targeting when you're trading all these people? Draft picks. You want to be liquid. You want to have draft capital. Not necessarily that you're going to sit on it and use it, but it's liquid and it's trading chips, right? And then you want to look at ascending assets, solid wide receivers that are age cliff, and target those. You want to build around those, and then obviously you have to build up your quarterback situation. But that's a little longer term, I think, for you. The cheapest they're going to be is in rookie drafts, so that's why you're going to want to amass that capital. The injury away running backs are people that you're going to want to target on the waiver wire, pick them up and flip them, when the person in front of them gets hurt. And anybody that you think can gain value, I want you to grab on the waiver wire, because you've got stuff that you just need to get rid of no matter what you do. Jamie mentioned Shai Smith. I mean, you're rostering Miles Boykin, and Jalen Hurd just retired. What
Evan Coleman is on there as well.
Right. If you're just going to do a reboot, if you're going to say, hey, listen, I'm not bad enough to suck. I might have 1 year left, and you're not going to do a reboot. You're just going to retool a bit. You need to fix quarterback really quickly, and you want to use Swift, DK, and your second round picks to try to piece something together. You might want to tier down from DK to a lesser wide receiver plus like a Ritter, Howell, Tannehill, Purdy type, that's probably your best bet as far as fixing quarterback goes. Or, Swift, DK in some seconds, and then try to get like a Deshaun Watson, a Dak Prescott, a Daniel Jones, something like that, right? And also, if you are just retooling, you're going to want to have better running back depth. And so you're going to want to move things like third-round picks, Dulcich, veteran wide receivers like Boyd, Parker, and Woods. And you want to be lean and mean at wide receiver, and then have good running back depth of injury away guys and guys like that can gain value, or you can plug and play or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of like, I personally would lean the former. I'd reboot this. I like blowing things up. But if you're just going to retool, then that's what I would advise doing.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And you mentioned some of the guys on his bench, the roster cloggers. I mean, these are true roster cloggers. Sometimes we say roster clogger, and the guys might have some value. But Tevin Coleman, Josh Reynolds, Denzel Mims just got cut. Jalen Hurd, it's just Miles Boykins you mentioned. Those are true roster cloggers. Those guys almost have no value whatsoever. I like to maximize my roster. I will never in any of my dynasty leagues have open bench spots during the offseason. I will put all the guys I can possibly put on my taxi squad just to get more people from the waiver wire, because you never know what's going to happen. But when you have guys like that on your bench, you're not maximizing your roster. Get guys that, maybe they're the fifth string running back, and, they have an opportunity to at least make the team, whereas some of those guys aren't even on teams right now. So, I always try to maximize my roster and get as many people as I can. You mentioned trading all the running backs. I agree 100%, because by the time this roster is ready to be competitive, Swift, Gibson, and all those guys are going to be past their prime. Madison, you mentioned you're not a big fan of Madison as far as, right now he's a starting running back, but who knows how long that'll be. Maximize that too, take advantage of that. And then with the Stafford thing, I think the best time to probably trade him is during the season. I think right now it'd be hard to move a veteran quarterback that has injury, but if he comes in and, does what I think he is going to do and throw the ball a ton, they got a terrible defense. He does have one of the best receivers in the game, so he will throw the ball a ton, put up some fancy points. Then you try to move him to a team that might need a quarterback. I think you can get more value out of him that way. Chu, let me get your thoughts on this team here. You had him at 12 as well, right?
Yeah, the tricky thing with this team, I think with it being a 12-team league, you've got, I think it's 9 starters, excluding the kicker and the defense, and you also have tremendously deep rosters, 30 plus, it looks like, for each team. So, yeah, the one thing I noted for each of these teams is everyone has their list of bottom of the roster, which is an amalgam of retired guys that aren't on actual NFL roster, or guys that we forgot are on an NFL roster. And I mean, that's, I guess, kind of what you have to deal with the depth of these lineups and rosters here. But yeah, the big thing is if you don't have a second starting quarterback in the NFL, it's not even a Ryan Tannehill, it's not even a Desmond Ritter. Like, you're in a tough spot in this league for sure. And the fact that the number one guy here is Matthew Stafford, yeah, the age of this team, the fact that when you're looking at, all right, is it going to be rebuild, just a retool? I don't really see. The closest thing I can see maybe to like a cornerstone to kind of build around from here, being young enough and talented enough, is maybe a DK, but that's a tough spot to be in for sure. So whatever value you can zap out of these guys, I think there's enough holes on other teams that you have some of these guys. I'm a big Swift fan. Cooper, I think, is going to have a good year. So there's enough of these guys that I feel like you can move on from, and hopefully get value. I know looking across this league, there's almost all of the teams that still have their own first. So, I mean, in terms of trading for picks, I don't know the history of this team. Clearly, it has not been a tremendous amount of, first going back and forth, one team being able to accumulate 3 firsts in 1 year, possibly. But hopefully maybe that can change this year. And, there's not a tremendous, on this back end of the league here, there's not a tremendous like power struggle. I feel like there's a lot of guys that could kind of go up or down. And in this scenario, make sure you're down so you can lock in that top 2, top 3 pick and, be on the upward trajectory with a good quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Just real quick, I pulled up their waiver wire because I'm still in the league. And just looking at the trending players, some of the names I would have over some of the guys he has on his bench. Trey Palmer, young receiver for the Bucks, with Russell Gage just getting hurt. Elijah Dotson's still available. Cole Turner, the tight end for the Washington Commanders. Elijah Higgins, who's a receiver turned tight end in Miami. Those are all guys that I'd prefer to have over some of the guys he has on his bench. Not that they're going to be anything, world beating, but they can definitely do more than some of the guys you have on your bench. So always your roster.
Is Jaleel McLaughlin available?
Let's see.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm going to guess he probably is.
All right. Small guy, super fast. He finds a crease. He's gone. Not a lot going on in the Denver backfield behind Javonte and P. Ryan. He brings a different skill set. Lots of positive reports in camp. He's a deep stash. He's a million times more worth being on your roster than Miles Boykin.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right, I think we've bashed this roster enough and enough options here. Let's go ahead and get to team number 11.
Number 11.
Number 11 team ranked as high as 11 and as low as 12, and it is the Ewings. And Josh, this is your team.
Yeah, so I'm just going to start from the top down and start at quarterback. And really, honestly, the theme for this whole team is outside of two players. This whole team is kind of QB 2s or 3s, wide receiver 2s and 3s, running backs 3s and 4s. But at quarterback, you got Kenny Pickett as a starter, Derek Carr. Those are all QB 2s. Not really comfortable with them as my QB 1. And looking at the bench, it's just kind of the same. You got Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Baker Mayfield, Jimmy Garoppolo. All of those are starting quarterbacks, potentially Baker Mayfield. But so that does hold some value, but at the same time, I'm not comfortable with any of those as a QB1. So maybe at some point you could package some of those or send a couple of those off for some young players, maybe some rookies. Running back, I think you got a decent core. It just won't really bring you any value this year because neither one of them are technically slated as a starters. Tank Bisbee will get some work, but him at the RB2 is still kind of concerning. Devon Achane looks pretty good in the preseason. I'm going to talk about him more on Saturday as a riser. So I'm actually kind of high on him, but still having those two as your top running backs isn't, that's not ideal. I'm just going through the starters. The wide receivers, you can build around Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's someone you should definitely keep on your team. And if you rebuild, hang on to him and kind of build around. Devontae Adams, he's good, but well past his prime. In Dynasty, he doesn't hold as much value. I think you could probably trade him away to the contender, one of the top teams. Maybe get some, I don't know if you can get some picks, but you might be able to get some young players. The tight end is actually kind of ugly. You got Noah Fant. I don't even know where I have him ranked, probably in the late 20s. But, it's not ideal. And Calvin Ridley and Jacoby Myers are decent flexes, but the fact that the rest of your roster is kind of weaker, I would definitely try and maybe move those. Either try and get some picks or try and get some young rookies to where you can just kind of hold them on your roster and see what happens. And the bench is not terrible, but you also got Jamal Agnew, Matt Breida. Some of these guys don't really hold any value. I think you could probably get some better. Leonard Fournette, we don't know where he's going. Cordell Patterson, all these are old guys who don't really have much of a role right now. Ezekiel Elliott, he might have some value. You might be able to trade him. Draft capital's good. Sorry, I'm kind of going off the top of my head because I had to relocate. I don't have all my notes I had, but I think that covers most of it. Yeah, definitely needs a good overhaul. But you got some good young pieces like Tyler Scott. I kind of like him. You got some pieces to build around, but you definitely need to go and make some trades.
Yeah, this team to me is like compared to the last team that we did. That last team I felt like had enough players with value that he could make some moves. This team was like you mentioned, they're all kind of middle of the road. Is that quarterback room can be any more boring than Kenny Pickett, Derek Carr, Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Baker Mayfield, all starting quarterbacks, but probably the boringest quarterbacks you could possibly have. They have almost no upside, really. I guess Pickett has upside if you believe in him, but those other guys, we know what they are. And same thing with his receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I love him. He's probably the piece I would build around. If I'm going to keep one of them, I'm going to keep Amon-Ra. Devontae Adams, you mentioned getting up there in age, now has Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback, and who knows how long that marriage works. So he's somebody I'd be looking at moving for sure. Devon Achane, Tank Bigsby, you mentioned, young running backs that by the time your team is ready to compete probably aren't going to be worth much anymore. So they're guys that I would sell while their value is hot. And then, the bench is more the same, just guys that are just sort of bleh. Like, you know, they have value, but they're not nothing you're really excited about. So it's a go ahead. Are you going to say?
No, go ahead.
Jump in. Yeah, I just it's a very boring roster. There's not nothing that I'm excited about. I want to get your opinions here, Brian. What are your thoughts on this team here, ranked at number 11? Brian.
Yeah, I was looking for the mic. I was muted. So, you know, I think y'all covered it pretty well. I think one of the interesting things with some of these rookies, for example, like Achane and Bigsby, right? On the one hand, it's like, oh well, you know, they're young, so maybe they'll still be, you know, okay when I'm competitive. On the other hand, they're running back, so they're a broken ankle away, or, you know, even worse, an Achilles away from. But, you know, and then also you have to ask yourself, like, is their value going to go up or down, right? Like right now, Tank's got a hive. I'm part of that hive. I'm not the hive that says Tank is better than Etienne. I'm part of the hive that says the Etienne truthers are way over their skis on Etienne, and Tank's going to have a role, right? So is there somebody in the league who's in the hive with me? Then Tank's going to have value, right? Or do you think his value is going to go up even more because you have faith he's going to get used, and then everybody's going to be in the hive, right? So these are things that you just have to sometimes figure out what the bets and the calculus is. You don't always get it right. Like even the best of us get it right 55%, 60% of the time. So
yeah, I agree 100%. I think that, you know, there's pieces to be moved here. There are things that can be done, but you have an uphill battle here. So you got to figure out which direction you want to go here and just go for it all. It is good, like you mentioned, Josh. They do have their all their draft capital. So if they were to tank this year, they would get a pretty good pick next year. So, and if you do get that pick, do not go running back. I think that's what you did this year. You got Achane, probably fairly high. Bigsby is probably a second round pick. I would have preferred you go receivers there with this squad the way that it's built. But you've already done that part, so we can't go back and fix that. But for next year, I would get either quarterbacks or receivers, guys that have more longevity than running backs until you're ready to compete. All right, let's get to number 10.
Number 10.
Number 10 team has a little bit more disparity. We got ranked high as 7 and as low as 10. And it is landslided. I'm guessing. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. But Shu, this is your squad here. Give us your breakdown.
Well, I only looked up Father Dynasty and Icelandic, so I'm not going to even attempt the name of this team here. But I see you starting off with trying your best for some sort of a giant stack with the Daniel Jones, got Paris Campbell, Hyatt, and Crowder. But you know what I see here is it's an okay group of receivers. I think when you think in Dynasty, there's a couple of younger guys, first, second, third year guys that the name and the Dynasty community, maybe just the sheer value, independent of the actual production thus far, still holds some good weight. Two of those guys being Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson. And I think with a team like this, I do like Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers this season. Beyond that, I don't know what that's going to look like. And of course, the depth beyond that is Ian Book, Matt Ryan, Brian Hoyer, Sam Darnold. So, that's the theme in a lot of the teams in this league is with the deep rosters, a lot of these guys are rostering the second and third quarterbacks on different teams. I think with the hope of having a Minshew-esque rise or having one of those rises where I'm going to end up having one of the 32 starting quarterbacks through some series of injury and that sort or demotion, that sort of thing. So I see what you're doing there. And, when I look at this is, I see Kittle was a couple teams ago. Freiermuth is a guy who I feel like has tremendous value, both, in this season for his actual fantasy output. And I do think as just a dynasty asset going forward, I think it's going to be a good one to hold on to. Like I mentioned with Burks and Dotson being good guys. And, with the running back room, I think there's a good depth there. You've got Etienne, you've got Harris, you got Mixon as well. And another guy, I think two guys I like. So Khalil Herbert and Jeff Wilson, who I know we have A-Chain now in Miami. And I do still think it's the Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert show for a bulk of the carries, but I think A-Chain's going to be utilized, not as a weapon, better than that, but, still not quite a true running back necessarily. But, beyond that, there's not tremendous depth. that I'm seeing at the wide receiver or tight end positions. It is not a tight end premium, so I think that's not too much of an impediment for the team here. But I really think that if you're going to look to make any moves here, like I was mentioning with a couple of those wide receivers, the Treylon Burks and the Jahan Dotsons, and you do have a couple of other running backs there. I think if you were looking to move, say, Mixon and Burks and try to get yourself a young stud cornerstone receiver, and if you have to add some draft capital on that, you can. But I think if you did that, you would not be hurting yourself from a output standpoint in terms of your fantasy production this season, and you'd also be getting yourself another true cornerstone that I think you can build going forward, who, if he were to get injured or something this year, have a down season, he wouldn't lose his value, and you can flip him if you needed to adjust from there. But overall, I think you're not quite in these latter three teams that we ranked here, but I think you have some positive vibes going forward if you maybe make one or two moves here or there.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, like in our rankings, we all give our rankings, and then we give the conglomerate ranking, and there's a tier break. Those first two teams were 11.25 and 11.75. This team was ranked, as far as our consensus, at number 9. So a full 2 points from the other team, which is the largest disparity of any two teams in our rankings tonight, is a 2.25 difference. So this team's got a little bit more going for it. When you look at that starting roster, really there's no one that I'm like, oh man, I can't have this guy on my starting roster. I feel comfortable with Daniel Jones, Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Burks, Dotson, Freiermuth, Mixon, all the guys you mentioned. Even Tyler Lockett as a starting lineup is pretty decent. And I think, you could be sort of in that position where you don't want to be in Dynasty, right? Where you're good enough to make the playoffs, but you're not really good enough to compete. So you're not getting the good draft capital, the good draft pick. So you got to make kind of a choice here and decide what you want to do. And probably not make the choice right now. I would make the choice in the season. If you start off and you're 4-0, 5-0, 6-1, whatever, okay, you're going to go for it, make some trades, get some pieces and go for it. But if you're on the opposite end of that, start deciding who you want to start trading away. Is it Tyler Lockett? Does Joe Mixon start hot? Do you move Joe Mixon because he's getting a little bit older? So I think the decision's got to be made at some point early in the season of what you're going to do, either go for it or basically tear it down and start over again. Brian, real quick, what are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, I just want to comment on the tier break you talked about. I agonized over 7 through 10 in this league. Like, I went back and forth like 4 different times, like mixing them up. And, ultimately I wanted to punish a team that we're going to talk about a little later for trading away too many picks. And so that might have elevated this particular team to 7 for me. But again, like 7 through 10 for me was kind of a flat tier. And if you find yourself like closely bunched like that, there's like 2 ways you can go. And one is going upward to be competitive, and the other is going downward to really retool. Ultimately, I think every team, every manager should be going towards a way in which you're getting out of this idea of contend, rebuild, and you're just more of an even keel. Not that you're in the middle, but you're always, competing, but always also have enough draft capital and are keeping young and keeping fresh. But until you're there, you now, like, if you're in that bunch of teams, you've got 2 choices, and figure out what you're going to do in the first couple of weeks, because you want to be early on in that trade market. And I would also end with this, saying that for me personally, it's always been easier to tear down, to sell pieces and get bad and get those points off my roster and get picks than it has been to try to climb up. So
yeah, that's a good point. All right, let's get to team number 9.
Number 9.
Number 9 team ranked as high as 6 and as low as 10. So a good disparity here. And it is team Helisey. And Brian, this is your team.
Yeah. So excuse me. I was just like a little below consensus. I had them, I think at 10 maybe. And this team ended up at 9. I'm looking at some age on this team. I think you're thin at running back. You've got too many starting spots and roster spots dedicated to tight ends when it's not a tight end premium. Your starting wide receivers are meh, and your bench ones are very meh. It's hard not to try to compete with this team, though, because there's enough there. But your window is short. And you might be, like Jeff was just saying, destined for the middle, right? So I think you have two options with this team, and I'll get to that in a second. But you do have intact draft capital, which, again, is something I like to see when the patients come through the door. So quarterback, we've got Cousins, Goff, Russ, Andy Dalton, Teddy B, and Eason. Running backs, we got Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt, Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris, Sean Tucker. Wide receivers, Debo, Juju, and then it gets real bad. Trey Tucker, or whatever the hell he is, the Raiders. He was way overdrafted by the Raiders. Sterling Shepard, Isaiah McKenzie, Ray McLeod, etc. Although, Osborne isn't bad. And then tight end, though, like, you got Kelsey, who is essentially a wide receiver in a non-tight end premium. And you have Kincaid, who could be essentially a wide receiver in a tight end premium. But the other ones you kind of don't really need: Chig, Schultz, Tremble, Darnell Washington, that sort of thing, right? So you got two options. One is you build the plane while you fly. I want you to thread the needle. So what does that mean? You want to make very precise and specific trading that gets you a bit younger and a little bit of draft capital without sacrificing that competitiveness. So, for example, you might move a Derrick Henry for a younger running back who's valued less in the market plus a pick, right? Similar idea you might want to use with Cousins, Russ, or Goff, right? Go down a little bit at quarterback, maybe knock on the door of that team that Josh was talking about that has 17 quarterback twos, right? And then get a little capital too. Like, what can you get on top of Pickett for Goff or Russ or Cousins, right? And so that you're kind of staying competitive, but you're also kind of refreshing and get a little younger and get that draft capital. You also, I don't like Debo and Juju as your starting wide receivers. So, Debo's in this huge tier of wide receivers for me. It's like my wide receiver, like 19 to 33. Trade him for a younger wide receiver in that big tier that has less name value, get some picks on top of it, but has a shot at having as good a year. Like, there's probably leagues where you can get a plus on top of, Jahan Dotson, Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Christian Kirk. You can probably get a plus on top of some of these guys in some leagues for Debo. Try it. Figure it out. Like, so that way you're staying competitive, but you're refreshing yourself a little bit. The other option you have is your wide receivers are so bad, and that's such an important position to build around. You want to focus on, like, really targeting that you're improving that position. And it's like, compete if you can while you do that, but expect to maybe take 1 year off, not a rebuild, take 1 year off from contention, fix your wide receivers, and then get back into it. So you're not like rebooting, but you're saying, listen, I really want to focus on the most important position in Dynasty. Shed some of that age with Henry and Dalvin Cook, move it to the investments toward wide receivers, and then come back to fight again next year. Those are the two options I would do with that team.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I'm looking at it. I had him at the highest. I had him at 6. And quite frankly, I'm looking at a team now. I don't know how I came to that conclusion. Not that it's a bad team. I just don't know where I came up with the 6 ranking there, because you mentioned some of the guys, like his receiving core is not good. I'm a Niners fan, and I prefer Brandon Ayuk over Deebo Samuel, even though Samuel is being drafted over Ayuk currently. Juju, I think he is what he is. He's a good receiver 3, but nothing that you want to really build around. And then you mentioned the tight ends, and it's not tight end premium. I mean, he has good tight ends. I mean, if he was tight end premium, he has some pretty good value there. But the fact that it's not, and it's going to be hard to move them for any value because it is not tight end premium, and tight ends just aren't worth that much. And I just don't see, where this roster. It's tough because you mentioned, like, he's sort of in that same range as the team we just talked about, where he's kind of in the middle. He can compete with this roster, and I guess depending on how the season starts, you can just make the decision if you're going to go for it or not. But it is like one of those things where you can almost with this roster, like you mentioned, compete and rebuild sort of at the same time. So I definitely agree with that. Josh, any thoughts on this team?
No, I think Brian went really into depth in that, and a lot of what he said echoes kind of onto the team I'm about to cover. So,
all right, let's go ahead and get to that team.
Yeah.
Number 8.
Number 8 team ranked as high as 8 and as low as 9. So we were all pretty much on the same boat with this team. And it is team Hallam Borgen. That's what we're going to go with. And Josh, go ahead and break it down.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go down the line again. This team actually has a lot of really good young pieces to build around, but kind of like the last team, I think you could make a push this year, but I don't think it's in your best interest. And the main reason is because Breece Hall, I just don't trust him. I think he'll be okay, but I don't trust him to really be himself until maybe later in the year. And that's going to really hurt your value early in the year because there's reports saying he can't make certain cuts or he's afraid to. So I think that's going to be more of a 2024 play there, but it's, like I said, a top 3 dynasty running back. But yeah, quarterback, you got Bryce Young, Tua. I'm really happy with those two. You can definitely hang on to those and build around them. CJ Stroud. And then after that, you just have this team has way too many quarterbacks. You can drop Colt McCoy. Well, not Colt McCoy. You can drop Skylar Thompson. You can probably hold Colt McCoy. Taylor Heineke, you can drop him. Hendon Hooker, I'd hang on to. But Sam Ehlinger, you can also probably drop him as well. But even then, that still gives you 5 or 6 quarterbacks, which is a lot. So maybe you can move some. The running back room, outside of Breece Hall, you got Jamal Williams. Not a fan. I don't think he's really all that great. I think last year was kind of a fluke with all the passes that ended at the 1-yard line. They just gave it to him. With that backfield, Kamara looking good already. I don't hold too much value in him, especially at his age. But then you got Keontae Ingram. He's a good stash. Chris Rodriguez, that's fine. McKinnon has good value this year. You could probably trade him if he has a few good games to somebody more contending because he's up there in age. Snoop Connor, not as good of a stash now that they got Tank Bigsby. Kind of takes over his role. Himes is kind of done. And Foreman, he's solid, but I think he's going to be the RB3 there because of Roshan, who's soon going to be the RB1 there. And then Chris Evans, he's a good stash. He could be a good handcuff for Mixon. So you got some good pieces to build around, but you also got some pieces you could probably move to get younger again, because I don't think you're going to be competing this year. And a lot of that's because wide receiver. Mingo, he's kind of a wild card, low floor, high ceiling potentially. Rashee Rice might be the same. But at the same time, I don't really, I kind of like getting young receivers and seeing what happens, especially Rashee Rice. Tight end room's really nice. I love Michael Mayer. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I think he's kind of getting slept on. I think he's always going to be open and always catch the passes. I think he's going to be a good safety valve, just kind of like Hunter Renfrow there. And you got Will Dissly. You could drop him. Jelani Woods is a good stash, and Komet Gesicki are really solid tight ends. So I think I really like the tight end room there. I think I missed a few receivers. Hunter Renfrow, he's my most rostered player by far. I have him in almost 50% of my leagues. I think he's going way too late. Going to be a really good target like Mayer for Garoppolo, who isn't that great at throwing it deep. Sky Moore, good young piece to build around. Wandell, same thing. I don't think he's going to be super healthy this year, but he'll be really good in 2024. And Allen Lazard should be decent in Rondell. So I really like this team. It's young. I think you could possibly trade Tyreek, maybe get that first back and get some younger players since you're not going to be competing this year. There's no telling what he's going to do after this year. He's getting kind of up there in age, although he's still really good. So I think you can get a first and then maybe a young player or something else on top of that. So that's really the only major move I would make, I think, besides dropping some quarterbacks.
Yeah, so obviously, he had some pretty good draft capital, this past year because he got Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. So
Yep.
I think he's doing it right in that sense that he went and got 2 quarterbacks that, conceivably have a long career ahead of them and build around them. And just going on your Jamal Williams take about him falling in from the 2-yard line, I heard a stat that was kind of interesting that Jamal Williams, obviously, we know, led the league last year with most touchdowns within 2 yards, but Amon-Ra actually led the league in most pass receptions that fell 1 or 2 yards short of the end zone. So a lot of that came from that. So that's just an interesting stat that I heard today. But he's somebody that, honestly, early on, if he does pop in those first 3 games with no Kamara and, Kendrick Miller kind of being on the mend, maybe you can get someone to bite on him for those first couple of games. Tyreek Hill, you mentioned, I'm with you on that. I think you can move Tyreek Hill I don't believe the retirement talk that he's kind of spit out lately, but I do know that a guy of his stature, that once he loses that speed, once he loses a step, it's going to be very difficult for him to succeed after that. So I think he's a guy that I would rather be a year early than a year late on. I love Deontay Johnson. I've been getting him in as many leagues as I possibly can. I think he, had 147 targets last year and didn't score a touchdown. That's insane. That's going to change. So I think he's somebody you can probably still hold on to. Let me quickly get your thoughts, Chew, then we'll get to team number 7.
Yeah, I mean, one thing here, I think, this is certainly from a dynasty perspective, the best trio of quarterbacks when you're looking at youth and talent and overall upside, which I guess is melded into that youth there. But the big thing is if you, when you look at, say you have the Bryce Young and Tua and CJ Stroud, you then look to see, all right, what does the rest of this look like? I'm not huge in on Mingo and Rice. I know there is the benefit of having those younger receivers and seeing what they do. Certainly, I'm sure you're going to hold on to those guys. And, if they do start to ascend, if you're not buying into that and you feel like you're set at quarterback and, you do still have Breece Hall, and if you still hold on to Tyreek, you might be able to trade and compete sooner rather than later. As we've talked about retooling instead of rebuilding with some of these teams. But there's definitely a good amount of talent on this team that is notable, not just this season, but going forward as well.
Yeah, good call. All right, let's get to team number 7.
Number 7.
Number 7 team ranked as high as 6 and as low as 9, and it is Doorstep. And this is your team, Chew.
So really, the main bad thing I would say is the tight end room. The third tight end, I guess, is Jonnu Smith. And that does not bode incredibly well for the couple in front, which is Dawson Knox and Zach Ertz. Other than that, you have Patrick Mahomes. You've got Josh Jacobs, J.K. Dobbins, Damian Pierce, studs in Justin Jefferson and Chris Olave. Downs, I'm a huge fan of him and a huge fan of Anthony Richardson in Indy. As I look at a lot of these teams, I have my bottom of the bench, seeing that you still have guys like Kenny Galladay and Olivide Zaccheaus and Jalen Reagor and Mark Ingram.
Marlon Mack.
There's droppable guys, but as we've learned with this league, with the depth in it, there's always going to be droppable guys for sure. But whenever we do these things, I always like to key in on it. I think almost all but one of these PLPs I've done, I've gotten the Patrick Mahomes led team just to look at the roster and say, all right, well, how much fun would it be to have this team? Can I put my stamp on this team? And I don't have to do a fire sale every time I would hypothetically take a team over. But what does this team look like, and what could I do with it? And to be the team that has Patrick Mahomes, and then you have Justin Jefferson, and whatever you think about, is J.K. Dobbins going to have a career year and a contract year this year? Is Josh Jacobs going to come back? What is it going to look like going forward? And what does the running back landscape look like in Dynasty in the NFL going forward? I'm a big Brock Purdy guy. There's the big bugaboo aside from the tight end room is there's not really much tremendous quarterback depth here. And I know that there's tremendous confidence in Patrick Mahomes. We all presumably believe Brock Purdy is indeed healthy. Kyle Allen, Matt Corral, not a big believer in Will Levis. So I think for a team like you, a couple teams back that had 6 quarterbacks that are starting in the NFL, if you want to be able to go ahead, I wish I was exaggerating. I think it was 6 now that I remember. If you want to go ahead and trade and snag yourself a Jimmy G or one of those guys, it couldn't hurt to have that depth because, if you're a dynasty team that has Patrick Mahomes at a bare minimum, you've got a shot unless you just completely destroy the rest of your roster. And in this case, you didn't. You've got, at a minimum, in those weaker spots, you can stream and you can work your way through it. So this is a good team, a lot of top 3, top 5 players at certain positions. And it was certainly a fun one to look at thus far. It is interesting, though, that of all the talk that there's not a lot of trades of picks, this is, this team doesn't have their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th in 2024. And I think a couple of other trades after that. So couple of moves there, but do still have your first. So that's a good safety net just in case.
Yeah, this roster is pretty solid. I got to admit, this is a pretty good roster with Patrick Mahomes, Jacobs, Dobbins, Jefferson. This is a team. I had them ranked at 7 because you mentioned, they've got way too many quarterbacks. All those guys I mentioned earlier that are still on the waiver wire, I would prefer over some of those quarterbacks. Cooper Rush, Max Duggan. You mentioned the other guys. Marlon Mack is still on the roster. all those guys are droppable for some of those trending players right now that, they may not make a roster, but there's also a chance that one of them pops. There's zero chance that some of these guys pop. Marlon Mack already lost for the season, so I don't think his career is going to resume at any point. So, yeah, I agree. But this is a fun roster. I mean, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes. You mentioned Justin Jefferson. Jacobs, I think, finished as the RB2 last year. Hopefully he comes back and he can be, somewhat in that top 5 range. J.K. Dobbins is a guy that I'm super high on. I love Chris Olave. Lots of things I like about this roster. Brian, you had him at 9, so I'm curious to what your thoughts are here.
Yeah. First off, I don't like to see you missing your second, third, and fourth. And also, quarterback's the most important position, and Brock Purdy's your QB2. And it's not even like you have like a really plausible, quarterback 3 that I can remember where it's like, maybe that person has a chance. I just don't see it. Kyle Allen is like the backup. Matt Corral is, USFL bound. Will Levis is Will Levis and is now behind Malik Will, right? So and then the running backs are terrible after the first couple. And I just said, a couple teams ago, I like to have lean and mean at wide receiver and then a bunch of running backs to work with. And when I look at what you got there with, Jarrett Patterson and Zach Moss and Latavius Murray and J-Rob and Darrell Henderson, so yeah, it looks cool. If you told me oh, I can take over a dynasty team that's got Pat Mahomes and Justin Shepard, but look at the rest of it, right? And to me, it's just not a team I would have fun taking over. I'd be like, oh, I got not enough capital. I got, don't have a cupboard full of running backs. What am I going to do? So
fair point. All right, number 6.
Number 6.
Number 6 team ranked as high as 5 and as low as 9. It is Ari 3000. And Brian, you had this team at 5, so you were the highest, tied with Josh here at 5. So give me your thoughts on this team.
Yeah, like we said before, I kind of agonized over 7 through 10, and then after that, you start to get some more separation. And I have a pretty simple prescription for this team. You got a decent mix of youth and veterans. You're solid at running back, but maybe a little too much invested there. I don't love as your quarterback too. You've got pretty good wide receiver depth, but you need better guys at top, right? But you have intact draft capital, which I keep, I sound like a broken record. That's important, right? So briefly for folks watching or listening, quarterbacks are Burrow, Love, Lance, Stetson Bennett, Trubisky, and some guy named Tom Brady. Running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook, Kamara, James Conner, Michael Carter, Zamir White, Chase Brown, Gainwell, P. Ryan, Lou Nichols, Keaton Mitchell, and Melvin Gordon. Wide receivers, DJ Moore, D-Hop, Bateman, Keenan Allen, Mims, Brandon Cooks, Dontavian Wicks, Joshua Palmer, A.T. Perry, Jason Brownlee. Tight ends, I like the fact that you don't have a lot invested in tight end and a non-tight end premium, but you have for me, Dynasty tight end 1, and that's Pitts. So to me, the prescription for this team is pretty simple. You want to shift some of your investment and the value that you're holding on your roster from running back into wide receiver. It's just better because obviously longevity of the guys at that position, but also, better because even more broadly, it's what we build our dynasty teams around because of that longevity, but also better because I think it's going to help you be competitive, right? Because you've got a lot of running backs that are going to wind up sitting on your bench while you're scraping for a third wide receiver, right? So D-Hop's old. DJ Moore's good. I don't want him as my wide receiver 1. Rashad Bateman, I like him. I'm in on him this season, but I also wouldn't want to count him as my wide receiver 2. And he's got the foot thing going on and he's sort of working his way back. Keenan Allen, again, age, right? So it's pretty simple. I want you to move some of your running backs for quarterback and wide receiver, and in the process, get a little younger and or add draft capital as you do that. So, for example, move a Kamara or a James Conner, right? for a younger wide receiver and like, you know, a couple thirds or something like that, and just shift things around, shift your focus from too much running back to wide receiver, and you can and a better quarterback depth. Like, I love Lance. Like, I think the jury's still out on him, and he needs to get traded away from Kyle Shanahan, but he's not going to play really in 2023. We don't know what Jordan Love is. So, you know, I'm a little scared of your quarterback 2 and then deeper for 2023. So yeah, move some of the running back focus to quarterback and wide receiver.
Yeah, I agree with all that you just talked about. I think I had him the lowest on that, because the first thing I look at typically is the quarterback room. And obviously I love Joe Burrow, but you mentioned the quarterbacks he has behind Joe Burrow, and it's not something I want to rely on. I'm not a big Jordan Love guy, so that's, you know, obviously a detriment to this team for me. And the older guys you mentioned, D-Hop, Alvin Kamara, Keenan Allen, all guys that I'm looking to move. James Conner, also another guy that's on that roster that I'd be looking to move if he has any kind of decent season this year. Any more thoughts on this team?
I guess the only additional note would be I do love rostering 3 kickers.
Yeah, we don't talk about kickers at Going for 2, so that's always my advice, is get rid of the kicker position if you possibly can.
Please, no kickers, no defense, tight end premium. You're almost there. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen. All right, let's get to number 5. Number 5 team ranked as high as 4 and as low as 6. It is Gunny 76. And Josh, this is your squad here.
Yeah, so the summary of this team, the skill positions you're really good at, but quarterback and tight end, I think, is going to need some work. You got Trevor Lawrence as a starter. That's a great QB1. Very happy with that. Then looking down further than that, you got Ryan Tannehill as your QB2. That's obviously not ideal. You know, he's getting up there in age. It's not a pass-heavy offense. Then just to make matters worse, you got Mariota, Mike White. He's a good stash. Malik Willis, he's not good. He's Will Levis's backup, if that tells you anything. Aiden O'Connell's a decent stash. I don't know how useful he'll be. But then you got Sean Clifford and CJ Beathard. All of these guys, I think, can be dropped. I don't think they have any value in a dynasty league anymore. And then just to touch on the other weaker position, tight end. You know, I don't mind not having much invested in tight end premium, like Brian said, but you got Darren Waller. He's up there in age with injury issues. And then after that, you have Logan Thomas, kind of the same thing. Durham Smythe. Laporta's a good stash, but rookie tight ends can sometimes take a little while to get going. So that might be something to address. But then going from the running backs here, you know, you got Brian Robinson. I think he's a really good stash. I think they're saying how he's been working better in the passing game. And I think coming back from the gunshot wound, I think he was a little slow. So I think he's a pretty good running back, maybe not as your RB1, but maybe as a flex. Saquon, I love him. Tony Pollard, he's also a really good, top 10 back in my rankings for Dynasty. I think that sets you really good at running back. You got Eckler. Honestly, I would try and move Eckler, try and address some of the QB depth. You could probably trade him for like a Jared Goff, Geno Smith, and still get some young players or picks on top. So I would do that. Just scrolled over. Ramondre Stevenson, he's really good. I'd hang on to him. He's another really good running back, so I like that a lot. On the bench, you got Jordan Mason. He's a decent stash. I have him in a couple of leagues. But your depth outside of that isn't great. You got Evan Hull. I don't know how good he'll be this year. He could be a wild card. Could be decent, but at the same time, I don't feel comfortable plugging him in. Keyshawn Vaughn, same way. Josh Kelly, the exact same. So I think you could use some bench running backs also. And going wide receivers, you have some of my favorite wide receivers. Christian Watson, Jared Jeudy, really high on them. So I really like them in your wide receiver positions in Dynasty League. Both of those are set to potentially boom this year and gain a lot of value. You got McLaurin, who's another veteran receiver, good. Mike Evans, someone else you can plug in and have a really good year. I'm not as down on the Tampa Bay passing game as some people are, because they're going to be passing a lot, regardless of who's throwing it. Laviska, I don't think he has much value. Michael Thomas is done. He hasn't played healthy since 2019. But yeah, you have some really good pieces here. I'd address the tight end and quarterback room, maybe get some depth, another maybe young tight end, but to go with Laporta so when Waller's done. But I would definitely address the QB room and try and get a solid QB2, maybe another QB3 too.
Yeah, this team, what stood out to me is this team, we mentioned all the roster cloggers on some of these rosters, and this one definitely has some. CJ Beathard, I don't even know when's the last time he's even taken a snap in the NFL. But if you look at the bench, there's some guys on there that could probably start on other teams. He's got you got Mike Evans. You mentioned Michael Thomas. If he does play healthy in the beginning of the season, he's somebody that could be a starter on somebody else's team. Jordan Mason, if there's injuries to that offense, there's guys on the bench that I kind of like that could be moved for some value, during the season if some things break the right way. The top of the roster is pretty decent. You mentioned Trevor Lawrence. I love Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to have a near MVP type season this year. I think he'll be in the conversation. Barkley, Pollard, Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, you mentioned. I think Darren Waller for this season could be a top 10 tight end in that offense. So you could definitely look at moving him at if someone needs a tight end. Not without being tight end premium might be a little bit difficult. And you mentioned Ramondre Stevenson too. I love Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's going to have a tremendous workload. I know everybody's scared of having Zeke there now. I'm not. If anything, it might even help Ramondre, keep fresh by having Zeke come in on the short yardage downs, gain 3 yards. Maybe some of them are touchdowns, but I still don't think it matters. He'll be the one catching the passes out of the backfield. So I think Stevenson's perfectly fine. This roster, I think, could, even as it's constructed right now, if things go the right way, could be a competitor for the championship. Just the way that it's built with the depth, the fact that he could have some injuries and still be able to plug some guys in that are going to produce for him. So this is kind of where my personal tier break was. I have them ranked at 5, which is where we ranked them. And I think these next 5 teams are going to be teams that I think are really in contention for competing this year.
Yep.
All right, let's get to team number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4 team ranked as high as 3 and as low as 6, and it is Austria. And Chew, this is your roster.
Yeah, so we're getting into the meat and potatoes of the league at this point. So, I mean, when we talk about quarterback depth and superflex, and specifically in this league being 12-team, I think this is a pretty tremendous trio to have. Hurts, Geno, and Howell. I think Hurts, you have someone who can very easily be the QB1. You have someone who, like Geno, who just finished in the top 10, and someone in Howell who I believe today, if not yesterday, was named the starter in Washington after Ron Rivera had just an absolute carnival of an offseason saying it's going to be him, Brissett, or at some point I thought he was going to say he was going to step in himself under center. But they do also have a very strong 1-2 punch at running back. I think the name and the notoriety of a lot of these guys is pretty tremendous with CMC and Chubb. Having someone like Akers as the third guy, I think, is pretty tremendous, and that's more specifically because of the depth at wide receiver. And I mean dynasty depth in the sense of there is actual value to these guys beyond the season as well. With it's interesting having your first couple receivers being the number 2 options in their offenses, but they happen to be 2 of the best offenses in the NFL, and having Devonta Smith from the Eagles and T. Higgins from currently the Bengals. I'm one who thinks that, maybe down the line in a year or so, Higgins may end up actually possibly leaving Cincinnati if he's really trying to chase that money. And Cincinnati, being a smaller market team, maybe is not willing to pay him and Chase, but we'll see on that. But even beyond that, you do have very strong depth, and you've got Hollywood Brown, you've got Zay Flowers, George Pickens. I'm not as high on George Pickens as I know many people are, but not down in the sense of, regardless of if you're not as high on him, he's a good receiver, and the separation, nonsense, whatever. Like he's still a very good receiver. I do like this in terms of, so at tight end, I know we talk about this is not tight end premium, and for some of these teams, they're just going to have to stream and just hope for the best. And with this team, you've got Evan Ingram. I do like that. You do have a number of guys behind that who are either starting options or could become the starting options throughout the season. I'm a big believer in Jake Ferguson this season. Jawan Johnson, we'll see how that goes with the Taysom Hill experience and what that's going to look like throughout the season. Michael Thomas at the end of his road. Rashid Shaheed, I believe in him, but I'm very curious to see how that passing attack is going to be in New Orleans. But from all the teams, as I look at the bottom of the bench on everybody, I mean, if I'm being honest, aside from Jaron Hall and PJ Walker. There's other guys that I think are not tremendously valuable, but I'm not looking at it thinking, why on earth is this guy on your roster? And I think that kind of speaks to, as we're getting close to the top 3, top 4 of this league, you're going to see less and less of those guys that you just are confused why they're on a roster.
Yeah, I was just going to point out the same thing, that there's a lot of guys on the bench that, that do have some value, young guys and some middling guys as well, that I think pretty much across the board, there's not too many guys you can just outright drop. PJ Walker is probably one of the ones you can definitely outright drop. A few other guys on the bench, but for the most part, this roster is kind of how I would construct it, and just getting guys that could pop, that potentially could pop, and be something special going forward. Brian, you had this team the lowest. I'm curious to your thoughts on this team. Brian.
Yeah, sorry. I mute myself, so sometimes it takes me a second to.
All good.
Yeah. I had them 6, right?
Yeah, 6. Yeah.
I think for me, I look at like Chu said, I love Devontae and T. Higgins, but they are the number 2 options on their team. I think I would probably want a better wide receiver 1. I'm less of a fan of Geno than some other people are. It's not bad to have a quarterback 2 of Geno, but I'm not a huge fan. And then there's not much else behind it. Again, I like to have, really good running backs, and like there's something there, that you've got Algier and Spears and Akers and Chuba, hanging out there, but I would like to see some improvement there. The depth wide receivers are nothing to write home about. I'm not a big fan of Pickens. I'm not a big fan of Dubs. I think Chark could be sneaky good, but let's face it, he's DJ Chark. I love Juwan Johnson, but again, it's not a tight end premium league, and you've got a lot of tight ends hanging out here at the bottom of the bench. Like, it's just not really put together. And then also you're missing your second in 2024. So like, there's just enough there to ding that it's so like 7 to 10 was tough for me. It was pretty flat. Like 3 to 6 was kind of a little flat too. And this one just happened to end up on the bottom, I think.
Yeah, and this you're right, because this is very flat. Even our rankings kind of show that. If you look at our consensus, 1, 2, 3.25, 4.25, 5, 6.5, like it almost goes in the order that the rankings go, and it doesn't usually happen that way. Usually you see big breaks in the teams, and this league is pretty flat across the board. Which another thing I kind of noticed too is going through this league is that it doesn't seem to be a lot of draft pick trading. I mean, we've talked about a bunch of teams that have their full complement of picks, and there's not too many guys that have an overwhelming amount of picks. We've seen some leagues where guys have 4 or 5 firsts for next year because they've sold their entire team to get the entire draft basically for the following season. And you don't see a lot of that, and that's probably why this team is a little bit more flat, because maybe there's not as many trades going on where one team makes a few mistakes in the trading market and they're now a terrible team, whereas some teams sort of capitalize on that. But yeah, I think you're kind of splitting hairs at this point. I do like the quarterback room with Hurts being at the top, being the number 2. I'm a little bit higher on Sam Howell. I think I might be influenced by the fact that I live in Washington, D.C., and I hear all the good reports on the radio. Washington, D.C. is a very optimistic town in the offseason and a very pessimistic town during the season. But right now they're optimistic, and they all seem to love Howell. So maybe I'm being influenced by that. But yeah, overall, I think this is a pretty good roster.
This team should go make a trade with the Tyreek Hill team. Get a good wide receiver 1. I think that you could trade like Pickens and a pick or something and be fine.
Yep.
And that person could use a young receiver. So
good point. All right, let's get to team number 3.
Number 3
team ranked as high as 3 and as low as 4. So we're all pretty much in the same boat on this one. And it is the Dudes. And Brian, this is your team, and this is the this guy, sort of personally. So I made sure to give you this team here. So go ahead and
I appreciate that. Yeah, the Dudes is Stefan. I was joking before, but like I wasn't joking. He's literally the reason that the only country that Dynasty Fever charts in is Iceland. And so in honor of that, I'm going to speak some Icelandic. Bjork. volcanoes, horses. So interestingly enough, too, Stefan has a nickname that my co-host Jesse gave him, Firecock, and he was taking a woman on a date to a volcano, and Jesse just called him Firecock, and so like Jesse's been calling him Firecock ever since. So I love the dudes, I love Stefan. So shout out. Hopefully you enjoy this podcast. So we've got solid starters with some high-end players in there. Quarterbacks are a little shaky after your quarterback 2. And as we get towards the top of the league, you ask yourselves, how am I going to be competitive? How am I going to win? Right. And, I want to see 3-4 deep at quarterback. Good running back depth, pretty good wide receiver depth. Not great, but not bad. 2 really good tight ends. And then, you didn't waste your time with a bunch more in a non-tight end premium league. So like that. Compete this year without getting too old. I think you have a good window, and you can sustain that window with some of the right moves. But I would like you to address quarterback after your quarterback 2. And again, fairly intact draft capital, except for you're missing your 3rd in 2024. Quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Dak, and then Tyrod Taylor and Case Keenum. Running back, JT, Kenneth Walker, Javonte, Dylan, Sanders, Ford, Singletary, Bam Knight, Kendre Miller, Jalen Warren, Travion Williams, Haskins, Dearness Johnson. You've got some of those like contingency upside injury away guys that I love stashing, like a Singletary and a Kendre Miller and a Jalen Warren and a Jerome Ford, right? I think Sanders is underrated. He's gonna have a very good 2023, but you might have like just a couple too many running backs. Like you need that Goldilocks zone. Your wide receivers, Chase and Diggs, boom, right? Waddle, awesome. But then, we're getting into like wide receivers that I have ranked in like the 40s and 50s, like Sutton, Mooney, Mike Williams, and then even further down, Richie James, Shaheed, who I think is going to have a good year, but it's Shaheed, Mac Hollins, Deontay Hardy, Isaiah Hodgins, and Corey Davis, who Rodgers had them retain because of his run blocking. So I don't know that really you're looking to have him on the team. And again, you have some good tight ends, Hawk and Goddard, and then like Uzuma, but like you didn't waste your time with like, so basically, like I said before, it's pretty simple. You want to address your quarterback position using the running backs that you have on the roster. So you kind of have 2 ways you can do that. You can go big and make Dak your quarterback 3 by trading for somebody above Dak, or you can tweak it, right, and get a quarterback 3 level kind of guy. Like Gunnar Gunnarsson really has no reason to have Stafford on his team this year, right? See what you can do to move Stafford. Now, you're stacked at running back, and he might not want that, right? Because he's not competing, but you can probably work something out. And if Gunnar Gunnarsson is smart, which we hope that, well, I don't know if he's even checking the league, he'll take a running back now, knowing that he can flip it later, right? Just because you're trading for a running back now doesn't mean like you have to sit on it, right? So, move that Stafford, get I don't know, an AJ Dillon or and something, and then in the middle of this, when the season starts, then you flip Dillon, right, for like 2 seconds or something, right? So everybody wins. So yeah, those are the 2 ways you can address quarterback. Go above Dak for a quarterback 2 and make Dak your quarterback 3, or just tweak it below Dak, but largely using running back. I'd like to see you fix like some of the wide receiver depth, but it's good enough where like it's not like an emergency.
Yeah, this is another strong roster. Obviously, we're getting towards the top, so they're all going to be pretty much strong. But this is, it's got a good mix of youth and guys that are still also valuable. Like Diggs is still going to be good for a couple more years. You mentioned Josh Allen, Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker, Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase. I mean, that's a pretty solid group right there. Javonte Williams, I also really high on. This roster is good. I think this roster actually was the number 1 rated roster last year. So it slipped a little bit from 1 to 3, but I think this is definitely a competitor, a contender for sure. And there's not, there's some tweaks here and there, like Brian mentioned, a few things you can do to sort of tweak your team, but nothing that you got to do that's going to be major. And even if you left it the way that it was and just rolled it out, I think you could, still compete for a championship this year. What are your thoughts on this roster here, Chew?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting to the top here. Plenty of cornerstone guys at multiple positions. Depth would always be helpful, especially at quarterback. But, it is unique to be in a 9-tight-end premium league this deep and actually have two of those top 5 guys in Hockenson and Goddard. And I think in certain weeks you may end up actually starting both of those guys as injuries and stuff happen. And I don't think that would be a tremendous impediment to you. But it's good to be in that position to have two of those guys while still having the Josh Allens, the Jonathan Taylors, the Jamar Chase, the Jalen Waddle. So again, and Stephon Diggs. I mean, there's tremendous balance in talented top tier youth as well as the top end older guys like Diggs and that sort of thing. So you're in a good spot. Jeff, like you were saying, if they were top ranked last year, wouldn't surprise me at all. So a very good team.
Yep. Good stuff. All right. Number two team was ranked unanimously as number 2, and it is Honduran. And Josh, this is your squad here.
Yeah, so this team easily has the best quarterback room in the whole league. You got Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields. You cover all the rushing upside there. And you got Deshaun Watson as your technically third string quarterback. I have him as my QB1 in a lot of leagues, and I'm happy with it. So the fact that you have him as your third string's really solid. After that, you got Minshew and Huntley to back up Lamar. I'm actually kind of a fan of backing up your injury-prone quarterbacks, especially Huntley. He kind of struggled last year, but the year before he looked really good. I think he'll be better under Todd Monken. The running backs are the only reason I didn't rank this team as number 1. At the top, you got Aaron Jones. He's getting up there, but he can still help you compete this year. You also have David Montgomery, kind of the same. I'm higher on him than a lot. But after that, it kind of gets a little weak. Charbonnet, I think he'll have some value. And then after that, you got Malik Davis, Zach Evans, Deion Jackson, Eric Gray, Gus Edwards. You could throw Pacheco in there, but I'm not the biggest fan. But if you're trying to compete this year, he's not. You could do worse. And then you got Roschon Johnson, who I actually really like. But I do think being this high up, you could do a little bit better there. That's my only really complaint on this team. The wide receiver room stacked too. Yeah, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, all definitely top 10 Dynasty wide receivers. Drake London, I have him top 15, so that's another good wide receiver to build around. Ayuk the same, have him top 25. So those are really good. And then you still got Pittman on the bench. He's not far behind. Nico Collins is a really good stash. Puka, also a good stash. I'm not a big Gabe Davis fan, so you could maybe move him after a big bust game. Curtis Samuel, Michael Wilson, those are solid. And I also really like the tight end room. You got a top 3 Dynasty tight end, Mark Andrews, to stack with Lamar Jackson. And to go with that, you have David Njoku, who's top 10, and Isaiah Likely, who is, a good handcuff for Mark Andrews, but also should be featured a lot more this year with the new OC. He ran the 12 formation over 50% of the time at UGA, has a perfect roster to do the same. So yeah, this is a really, really good roster. I think you can move a few of your young pieces to maybe strengthen your running back room. But even still, you have a really good chance to compete. But the running backs are the only reason I didn't put them higher. I did want to ask y'all's thoughts on having that strong of a third QB. I've heard some people say they trade it, get a lesser like a Sam Howell, and then get some more players. Or do you guys kind of like having that strong of a third quarterback?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that, and I was going to ask the same question essentially. Would you trade one of those quarterbacks, whatever one you can get more for, to upgrade that running back room that you mentioned? I'm going to get your thoughts on that, Chew. What are your thoughts on moving one of those quarterbacks and getting a running back and another piece there as well?
Yeah, I think this would be a team I'm comfortable in doing that. One, because you're one of 2 teams that have this stacked of a quarterback trio. The other one we'll be talking about here in a second. And the fact that I think you're pretty set and secure in those other positions, having young studs in AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Ayuk. I know you have Pittman on the bench as well. You've got Mark Andrews at tight end. So I feel like this is one where, you can comfortably tear down and not really be concerned that you mentioned to Sam Howell, like guys like Brock Purdy and Sam Howell and some of those guys that are in that latter, for most people's latter third in fantasy this year in expected finishes. I'm comfortable snagging one of those guys and knowing that I still have two of Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, and Deshaun Watson. And ultimately, you'd probably, if you're tearing down from one of those guys, if it's a Sam Howell, you're also likely getting a younger quarterback, which is always a good thing as well. But again, even if you did nothing, you're competing this year and you know that. But if you do that tier down and are able to get a better running back than starting, Aaron Jones, Charbonnet, or David Montgomery, I think you'd feel a lot more comfortable in that. And again, like we've talked about, everybody holding onto their draft capital, which is pretty tremendous. No one's really in a bad spot if this year didn't go their way, but things would have to go pretty bad for this guy to not be in a good spot.
Agreed.
I did want to add one thing about the draft capital. PSA to the rest of the league: stop trading. Do not trade any more picks to these first two teams because they are stacked on picks and their rosters are already stronger. So I don't think you should trade any more draft picks to them.
Yeah, they're definitely the ones making all the moves and getting all the draft picks. And
yeah, because they're both stacked and yeah.
Yep.
So it might be a long few years.
Yeah. Brian, what are your thoughts on trading a quarterback to upgrade your running back room? Are you in on that, or do you like having the three strong quarterbacks?
The short answer is yes and no. I think in general, I like to have a solid third quarterback in Superflex leagues. Injuries happen, ineffectiveness happens, etc. The question though is, how far down am I going to go if I still want to remain one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league? And at that break, how many of those quarterbacks are realistically available in a super flex to a team that doesn't need them or isn't going to, want your firstborn for them, and am I adding overall value to my roster? That's one thing that I always am concerned about. Win now trades are fine, but the best way to win over time is to always add value to your roster. Because when you make win now trades that are like all in trades, you marginally improve the percentage chance of winning the league at sometimes at the risk of losing the value on your roster and then taking 2 years to like make up for the value that you lost. So it's a long answer. It's really context dependent, I'm not looking at the spreadsheet. I'm looking at my rankings right now. So like I've got Watson at 9. How far down am I willing to go?
Goff and James Cook,
Goff and Cousins. Like Goff and Cousins and maybe Derek Carr or Mac Jones. Like that's about as low as I'm willing to comfortably go. Because running back's running back, right? Like I don't know. Like somebody's gonna get injured. Like. Charbonnet is a Kenneth Walker, knee away from like smashing. So I don't know. I think I can figure that out.
I think you could get like a Jared Goff and James Cook, maybe Brian Robinson to get a good young running back and still get a very good third QB. I think you could get that for Deshaun Watson. Probably more for Fields, but I'd hang on to Fields and Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
This is the perfect time for me to bring out something that I talk about a lot, and it's don't undervalue your players because of the position that you're in with your depth. What I mean by that is because you have those 3 quarterbacks, do not sell one of them for cheap because you're like, oh, I already have 2 guys, so I can sell him and get you still want to get market value. You still want to get as much as you can for a guy. So don't devalue your guy because of the standing that you have with your roster. So I always want to mention that.
It's a good point.
All right, let's get to team number 1.
Number one.
Number 1 team was also unanimous as the number 1 team, and this one's going to be really tough for me because I cannot pronounce that many R's. It's like a lot of R's in there. It's star. I don't know. Does someone want to give a shot at this one? Because I definitely cannot. Brian, you're the teacher here. Can you give us a shot here? give us a
Store Rainier.
There we go. That's perfect.
I grew up in North Georgia. I'm not the one to do that.
All right, Chew, this is your roster, man. Give us your breakdown here.
These are fucking Pokemon names, some of this.
You're trying to level up your Starnar? Yeah. I say, well, I will. Hopefully, this is a movie reference that is universal in all languages. A favorite movie of mine, Rookie of the Year growing up, was Funky Butt Lovin'. Because when I'm looking at this team, in 2023, they got Anthony Richardson, Bijan Robinson. You've got JSN, Addison, Johnston, Musgrave. Why not? But how is this also the only other team that has 2 firsts in 2024?
Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah, don't trade with them.
Right. Yeah. And, the big thing for this team is, you look at all of that, we all unanimously rank them first. As we talked about the last team having, I would say, the best trio of quarterbacks, this one, in my opinion, is a close second. Herbert and Richardson are 2 of my favorite guys this season. Herbert in already a tremendous offense. I think a narrowly underappreciated dynasty asset in the sense of he's produced. I don't think anyone's ignored that, but I think it's gone under the radar considering what he's been able to do. And he's now going to get Kellen Moore. He's going to get a couple more weapons, and it's going to be off to the races. Anthony Richardson, he speaks for himself. He was on Twitter today, jump throwing 50 yards because why not? But overall, really the only weakness for this team is the tight end room, obviously, and you still have Brett Ripien at quarterback and Gronk at tight end on the bench. So that's pretty interesting. But otherwise, I mean, you have the assets. I know hopefully someone wants one of those firsts that you have. You could trade someone a first just because you're bored to get a stud tight end and then just whoop everybody if you didn't already last year. So, at this point, what is there to say? I mean, another trade, I guess you could do, if you're bored. Trade JMO and see if you can, get either tight end depth or maybe some running back depth. Because I think, it's very top heavy at the running back position. But again, this is start 9, excluding the kicker and defense. And if 2 of those starters are Bijan and, I'm not big on Rashad White. Dude's going to get volume. I am pretty big on Rashad Penny because it is going to be more of a 2-headed than a 3-headed monster in Philly. No offense to all those Kenny Gainwell believers that thinking he was going to be that guy. But overall, this is a strong team. They have draft capital, which is a lot to say in this league, considering there's not a lot of moves in that department. So Starnar, level up.
Yeah, this yeah. When you mentioned, it didn't even click to me that these guys were all drafted this year: Anthony Richardson, Jordan Addison, JSN, Bijan Robinson. Like the list goes on and on. Like how the hell did he get all those picks and then still have extra picks next year? Like. This is a nice roster. It's definitely worthy of the number 1 pick for sure. I'll get both you guys' opinions here real quick. Brian, what do you think of this team here? Anything you wanted to add?
I think people just about covered it. I just want to talk a little bit about Herbert. I have already moved him up to number 4, and I'm flirting with putting him in number 3. You get just enough rushing from him, plus with this new OC that's going to, I think, really scheme to his talents. And he was playing with broken ribs and injured wide receivers last year. He's about to go off this year. He's got QB1 overall upside. Kyler is a really good stash. He's really way too cheap in startups. But it's also a guy that you could trade to a rebuilding team because chances are he's going to miss at least a few weeks. Yep. And if it is a full punt this year for the Cardinals, they're not going to rush him back. Trade him to a rebuilding team that can, afford to wait on him. And that's a starting quarterback in a super flex. You can get good stuff for it. That's the kind of move that I would make if I were you. I'd like to see the running back depth be a little better because, I sound like a broken record there. I just don't think there's enough there. But yeah, I mean, it's a really solid team. There's a reason all of us, ranked it number 1, and including because it's got 2 firsts and 2 seconds. So, you've got trade chips. Way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you need to add, Josh?
Yeah, this team might be in a similar situation when Kyler comes back, and if he balls out a little bit, you could probably move him and roll with Herbert and Richardson and get even more capital, help get maybe a better tight end, some more running backs. But that's it. I mean, the tight end room's a little weak, but still got Adam Troutman, tight end 1 in Denver so far, so it's not bad.
Yeah.
Now, JSN and Addison, that's great.
The only downside is the fact that he's got so many rookies in the starting lineup.
Yeah. The one thing I was going to say, the one reason I thought about not making this team number one is you all know that I think Richardson's the right bet to make, but that's something very different altogether from I think he's a sure thing to be really good.
Yep.
If he busts, this team's in trouble.
Yep.
Absolutely. That's 100% right. All right, that wraps up the podcast, gentlemen. I want to thank the league for your purchase once again. I know y'all purchased one last year as well. I'm not sure if we did one 2 years ago or not, but I know definitely last year you did purchase one. So thank you once again for making your purchase. I know where you're at right now. It is like 2:30 in the morning, so you're probably not tuned into this podcast, but hopefully you enjoyed the replay. We'll go around the room real quick, guys. Give us your Twitter handle so these guys can tweet at you and tell them how wrong you were about their team. We'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, at FFJunkie_ on Twitter. Hit me up. DMs are open. I'm all over the place. I'm in a million Discords, including the Going for 2 one, which you should join, GoingFor2.com. Little purple thing on the bottom right. Hop in the conversation. And Stefan knows where to find me. Gunnerson, I love you. I'm just busting chops.
Good stuff. Josh.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Rotonaut, ROTONAUT. You can also see me and Brian on Saturday. I unfortunately won't have this awesome setup and sound production. I'll be back at my house, hopefully, with the internet fixed. But yeah, it was fun getting to break these teams down. I really enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Chew.
Yes, check me out on Twitter and YouTube at Father Dynasty. Recording an episode coming up. Had a week off after going to the FF Expo, so I can be talking with my buddy about the Expo, talking about a little underdog DFS stuff. And yeah, for all you Icelanders, Five Fish, Astonavente out.
Nice, good stuff. And I see you rocking the Expo T-shirt too. Good stuff. All right, guys. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. I want to thank you one more time for your purchase and thank these gentlemen for spending an hour and a half with me to break your team down. Brian alluded to the Discord channel. If you're not already in there, go join that. We got a lot of activity in there. We got a lot of quote unquote verified experts in that channel, or that you can tag them and they'll answer your questions. It's a pretty active Discord. You can find that in my Twitter profile, or as Brian mentioned, at GoingFor2.com, little purple icon. Click on that; it'll bring you right to it. For Brian, for Josh, for Chew, I'm Jeff, and we hope to see y'all next year.